This is Miitopia. We're on the Nintendo Switch taking a look at this very casual RPG experience. It's turn-based and kind of plays itself almost. So this was originally a 3DS title that they've now ported over to the Switch so that more players can enjoy it. Hopefully, I guess, that it leads into perhaps a sequel or something along those lines. Whatever the case, the experience here is kind of charming and lovely. At the same time, I found it to be particularly repetitive and very boring and a bit stretched out gameplay-wise. So you've got your initial squad here, and it should be a mix of gameplay from like the first area. Just so I don't think there'll be anything too spoilerish in this one. Not that there's much of a story kind of present here. But the cool thing about this game is the fact that you are kind of making your own story, if that makes sense. You're basically using a very in-depth and sort of intuitive me creator, which I guess doesn't necessarily port over too well. You gotta have like an online connection to get, the Nintendo Switch Online to kind of port over certain, characters and stuff. So basically you're just making your own on this one, or you can use the defaults, but when you get into your first town or you get into a later town, it's basically like, okay, here are the rules, and then you get to create whatever kind of combination of these Miis you want. And it's the same with like when you get to the king, and the princess, you get to pick and choose, and the two lovers for the princess, you got to kind of pick what they look like and what they, are kind of all about. And then when you get your squad mates, you get to pick and choose who they are. So I've created a lovely cast here. Obviously, I'm the green guy there, as you can tell. And then I've got Triss, Yennefer, and Pan Am, which, it should be a fun kind of combination there. But there's certain points in the story where basically your cast kind of gets reset, if that makes sense. And then there's a bit of a build-up as you kind of get a more ultimate teaming kind of going on, and then you're able to put everybody together. It's very, very long. There's a lot to it, and it's a very paper-thin sort of narrative. If you're wondering about kind of the quality and everything like that, it's your very typical, guess, like 1080s, slightly sub, at 30 FPS, and then, if you're undocked, it's like, locked 720p or whatever, the same sort of combination. I didn't really notice too many issues. I do have VRR on, so that might have helped if there were, but it seemed to run very smoothly, and actually it looks really good considering the resolution of the title on a 4K screen. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I think it's the sort of, aesthetic that this game has that actually makes it upscale quite beautifully, which I was surprised about. So here, I specifically filmed this because it's supposed to show off all of the core in aspects of the game. So when you're moving throughout the world, you spend a lot of time at these inns. And when you're at these inns, you're kind of building the relationships of your crew. So your group is built upon these relationships and their strengths, and they give you bonuses when you're fighting. So you can kind of pair up people to sleep with each other, and they kind of get stronger bonds. You've got a horse eventually that you get as well, and then you send them on these excursions where they go to the beach, they go fishing, they go to a library, all this stuff. And then there's also these game tickets, and you'll see that momentarily here once we get back to the inn a little bit later. Not exactly, we go on a little bit more of a little bridge quest gameplay wise before that happens. But you're building up these relationships, and then when you're in combat, these are either going to be helpful or negative, because you can have the Miis that are kind of hating each other, and then they scrap in front of stuff instead of getting the job done. So it's actually like decently complex in that regard, but yet also just like sort of, I don't want to say the blandest, but one of the most repetitive and easygoing sort of turn-based games I've ever played. I'm not huge on the turn-based genre, at all, but sometimes they make it work where it's really interesting and I enjoy it. But for this one, it was basically playing itself. I couldn't even get to a level where I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, I'm doing strategy here. It literally just plays itself. So when you're playing in the turn-based, you can take on the role of your character, but only your character. You can't manage what the other, individuals in your cast are doing. So you have like a squad of 4. You get to control one of them, and the other 3 are doing whatever they want to do. So I decided, hey, I'm just going to turn on auto combat for my character too, because, what real difference is it going to make? And then you can press B to speed things up, which I've done a lot because it makes things go by a lot faster, because the game is really, really slow. it is zombie-like slow. So if you're, I consider it kind of to be like, this is my first JRPG experience, kind of. That's what I would put it into. This is, you know, for the younger ones, I think you could sit here and have them spend 30 plus hours probably playing this. They could go on and on and on and on. I think for most people, you know, you're either going to find this really charming and lovely and an adventure you can go on for a very long time, and other people like myself are going to be like, wow, this is a bit of a slog to go through. You know, I do appreciate the visuals. I like the relationship angles and stuff in this game. It is, again, surprisingly in-depth. I was not expecting there to be that much content in that regard. It's just like, wow, okay. There is a lot going on here as you build up these dynamics, and you have to take care of that too, because, you know, otherwise conflicts happen and then your team's not going to be able to handle it. So I also found this, you know, to be relatively easy. There's like difficulty build up as you go along, though, so keep that in mind. But yeah, for the most part, it's just kind of like playing itself. You walk through an area, you go to an inn, you do kind of excursions. There's also an element, and I don't know if I showed that off in this video clip, it might have been earlier. You can eat, and that gives you extra abilities. There's, like I mentioned, the excursions, the games, you get tickets for doing stuff. If you're trying to buy armor, basically when you're at the inn, your character will be like, I want to get a clothing item, or I want to get a weapon, and you can say yes or no. If you have enough gold, your character will either come back successfully with said item, or they will fail to come back with said item, and you might get a little bit of gold returned. You can then choose to equip the item so that your character has a new style of weapon, or you can choose to just inherit the upgraded damage and armor, for example, of said weapon or tool. So that's kind of cool. I'd say the most impressive part of this game is the customization. Oh, this is when I get to name my horse, so it's kind of fun. So the Miis, you can make whatever sort of crazy Miis you want, lots of different designs and options. It's a little bit weird though, because the Miis are kind of gone from the Nintendo platform. They were very much a thing with the Wii, but nowadays it's kind of like they don't really serve much of a purpose on the console, as far as I can think of. So again, some of the inherited systems of, like, you know, porting over your Miis and that are kind of like a little awkwardly placed within the game. There is like an amiibo spot too if you have that, so you can integrate there. So like, it's a game you can play a lot if you like what it is. I just personally found this to be insanely boring, and just like, I felt like I was numb just sitting there quickly trying to skip through things as fast as possible to play as much of it as possible. And then, you know, you get to the point where it's like your team gets reset, if that makes sense. And there's like, you have to do a new squad, and this happens, you know, the cycles throughout the game, and it's just like, it feels very long. But if you like how quirky and funny it is, you'll kind of like it. There was a strange point where I worked through so much of it where I was actually kind of finding things a bit charming, but at the same time I was just thinking, it was like, wow, I'm not really into this personally. And, you know, I'm trying to also see the value of this outside of like my personal enjoyment of said experience, because I'm sure there are some people, and I've actually went out and looked, and I've seen a number of people, you know, they talk to them about it and stuff, and they quite like what this is. They find it, you know, to be a lovely little title. And like I said, I think, you know, if you're looking at more teaching someone about, you know, this type of RPG game, this is a really good entry point to it, because if they like it, they can play a ton of it. And they'll be introduced to different concepts, such as like working as a squad within turn-based, managing your different armors and stats, and, you know, all that. It's just very much playing itself. You don't really do a whole lot within this. It's easy to save, and the game also reminds you many times, hey, you want to take a break? And I kept thinking, I'd like to, but I gotta keep pushing through through this. So that was kind of just a little bit of a funny joke thing there, where it's like, yeah, I sure like to, but yeah, it's interesting. It's not my type of thing. I don't really suggest this to most players, but like I said, if you find this style of, you know, kind of quirky action interesting, this is something that you can enjoy for a very long time, and you can like replay through it if you'd like. And the dynamics of creating your own story is kind of fun. I just wish that the actual narrative was more present and a little bit more interesting. But it's a funny thing. I mean, they got your faces, right?